G'day and welcome back to our Legal Studies Teacher Reads the News. This is actually an update of a story that I've already looked at for consumers. And it's this question of the role of law reform in recognising the rights of consumers. So the previous article was looking at there was a loosening of regulations around when trucks could deliver to supermarkets. Basically, there'd been a run on toilet paper, and they had basically said, you know what, we're going to allow trucks to deliver at any time of day or night to keep up with this issue. It was hailed at the time as a good news story. It made sense. It was great. Let's have a look at what's happened here. Noise fears as 24-hour supermarket deliveries slated to stay. This is by Angus Thompson. It's on the 15th of June. The New South Wales government has foreshadowed the possibility of keeping 24-hour deliveries for supermarkets beyond the use of COVID-19 emergency measures, prompting fears about noise from residents and councils. Earlier this year, Planning Minister Rob Stokes moved to override local planning controls to allow supermarket loading zones to operate around the clock, 7 days a week, in response to panic buying as the coronavirus pandemic gripped Australia. This change gives everyone the certainty we need to ensure these deliveries can continue, Mr Stokes said in March, following an amendment to the state environmental planning policy, which he said would be kept in place until the crisis was over. Remember, this was discussed in my earlier video, until the crisis was over. There's this question when it comes to regulations and loosening them and tightening them, etc. The government is always in control of when that ends. And it's always given a kind of loose interpretation over time, I have found. Let's continue. The special provisions allowing truck deliveries to supply shops and retailers with essential goods at all times are set to be in place until October 1. But his office this week said Mr Stokes was open to reviewing the measures along with others to see if any had gained widespread community support to continue. A well-placed source familiar with discussions said the government was considering keeping 24-hour deliveries. Local Government New South Wales President Linda Scott said the organisation representing councils supported the temporary lifting of truck movement curfews during the pandemic, but not beyond it. So remember, this is a state government, and then we've got local, the delegated local government councils. She's representing them and she's saying, look, we supported it at the time, but not past the pandemic. This is her quote. In order to preserve an appropriate balance between the public good and commercial interests, councils do not support any attempts to make these provisions a permanent arrangement beyond the October 1 deadline, Scott said. People who live near supermarkets and stores understood the need for short-term disruption to their amenity. As we move to change restrictions, communities expect councils to have a key responsibility in the creation of sustainable, livable communities. Truck movement curfews are an important part of that. Waverley Mayor Paula Marcellos, sorry if that's not how to pronounce your name, said her council was concerned by the potential impact 24/7 deliveries would have on the amenity of residents who live near supermarkets and wanted to further information from the government about when delivery times might revert to normal. Now that there is no evidence of panic buying as restrictions ease, I call on the Premier to revert back to council-approved hours, Councillor Marcellos said. Potts Point and Kings Cross Heritage and Resident Society President Andrew Woodhouse labelled any move to maintain the 24-hour deliveries a big mistake. In high residential areas and dense urban areas like Potts Point, the Woolworths there has an entrance which is within a residential building called Rockville Apartments. It backs onto a narrow width road where there are other small apartments. Those reversing trucks at 6 or 7 a.m. are just hell, he said. There you go. I don't think that's a theological distinction he's making. He's just saying it's not great. He said the COVID-19 measures had increased the noise pollution of trucks in the area during the early morning, and they were often seen queuing down the street. He said there was no justification for continuing to allow freight deliveries at all times of the day. The COVID-19 crisis is not an excuse to relax planning laws, he said. So, looking at our syllabus and thinking through this as a contemporary example, we've seen how the role of law reform here has allowed the rights of consumers to gain essentials so that the supermarkets can be restocked. That's fantastic. Everyone was happy with that good reform. It simply became a question of when these were eased. So this becomes a question of, well, how does the law relate to consumers as a reflection of changing values? Basically, we're seeing convenience for supermarkets of deliveries coming in whenever they are required and people receiving their goods whenever they need, clashing with the question of the amenity of the local area as the loud trucks come in and they're beeping as they reverse, etc., etc. On top of that, we've got this question of, well, what is the role of the law in encouraging cooperation and resolving conflict here? So consumers might enjoy that convenience, and other consumers say, no, 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 I bought a house near the supermarket with council approved hours, knowing that trucks could only arrive between this time and that time. And now you've loosened them. And my house has probably lost value because trucks can now come in any time of the day or night. So, what role is the law going to play when it comes to thinking through this issue? Dot points. Well, the developing need for consumer protection about this and thinking through, we can't make it just great for supermarkets and not great for the people that live around them. Also, you'd have the question of industry organisations, as the supermarkets are going to weigh in at this at some point. We'll see it in the future, and the role of the media, and what kind of remedies might be sought when it comes to maybe somebody whose house has lost value because of this, or somebody who's making a complaint to their council because Wally's or Coles has started deliveries at 3 a.m. in the morning and it's keeping their children awake, etc., etc. Okay, so there's a short little issue that's just an update on the toilet paper roll wars of 2020 as the pandemic caused a loosening of restrictions. And then we have pushback and this question of when should that loosening of restrictions be tightened up again? Who gets to win out in this case? Is it the supermarkets and the convenience of trucks coming whenever they want? Or is it local residents who are unhappy about noise complaints? Over to you.